I'd like to read to you as we begin here. By the way, I'm going to dispel some myths. Some myths of archaeology. Is this not working?
It looks like you'd be better with this one.
Okay, well,
It's up to you.
can you hear?
Okay.
I ain't leave it there, and either way.
Okay.
Well, all right. Unclip me, and I'll go with the traditional. Here you go. Testing. A. That's good. All right. Are you ready? I'm going to read to you from the book Education 17. See, we pick and choose sometimes the things we read, and people are shocked by what Ellen White wrote. Every human being created in the image of God is endowed with the power akin to that of the Creator. Individuality, power to think and do. We are not teaching our young people how to think, how to process. And when I taught all those years at Glendale, when I was a member here, and I had to run right after Sabbath school and go in and be with them for the worship, as you remember, man, was I running my wheels off. But I love being with you folks here at Sabbath school and teaching that class I taught. The power to think. Today, that's the problem we have on our university, even our university campuses. Let me share with you this week. A professor decided to find out what the graduate students really, what made them tick. And so he took the president's idea of tax reform, but told them falsely, this is what Bernie Sanders. And they all loved it till they found out it wasn't Bernie Sanders. And then they hated it. What is that? That means you're just following the guy you like. The power to think and do. The people whom the power is developed are men who bear responsibilities or are leaders in enterprise and influence character. It is the work of true education to develop the power. But there's a danger in that. Because when you ask somebody to think, they might not think anymore what you want them to think. And where archaeology comes into this, my dad was scared to death. He didn't realize that to begin with, I had a firm foundation in the Word. Then I ventured out to listen. There are many archaeologists. There are not that many in the church, but the one that are here, many of them make outlandish claims. I won't name names. Afterwards, I can share names. All that, but they're selling videos, and they know where the Ark of the Covenant is, and they've seen it, and they sold all kind of. This kind of thing hurts what I'm doing, because I'm doing it from a science point of view. I have to go up against real geologists, anthropologists, and scientists. And so when I run my series, that was one thing when I was up in Ridgecrest, there are more doctor's degrees up there per square inch than any other place on earth, because we have the base there, the weapons base that they all work at. And they would come and say to you, the first one who's convinced me through archaeology, he says, a lot of this is just pablum. Instead of educating weaklings, she goes on, institutions of learning may send forth men and women strong to think, to act, who are masters, not slaves of circumstances. They possess breadth of mind, clearness of thought, and courage of their convictions. Isn't that amazing? Courage of their convictions. Archeology and anthropology and paleontology, so I'm really versed in all three of those. They walk hand in hand. Archeology is digging up the past, history. A lot of it, yes, I have to be a grave robber. And I don't know what people think in ancient times about having their graves robbed, but you see, in ancient times, they used to put things into the tomb that were precious to them, writings and different things. And those are invaluable. Paleontology is the study of fossils, and I've got several up here. And anthropology, anthros, the old word, meaning people, the study of civilizations. And whenever I get a chance to go to Andrews and talk to the future ministers in the summertime, I'm discouraged sometimes because I said you have to learn Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic to be able to decipher cuneiform and hieroglyphics. Oh, that's too much work. Okay. See, I had to know what was on those tombs in Egypt. I have to know when I see something that looks like chicken scratch, what is this? It's very interesting that in Jeremiah 32:14, they were told, put these words in earthen vessels that they may continue many days. Thus the Dead Sea Scrolls became one of the centerpieces. Of course, at Qumran, next to the Dead Sea, they were writing new Hebrew manuscripts on calf skins. What is special about that is you can get DNA off of this. You know, it's skin. And you can learn a lot about the animal and the place and also the times that it was written. What you're looking at is the Ark Log. Now, a lot of people are not aware. They'll come to me and they say, Moses wrote the book of Genesis. He didn't live back then. Where did he get the information? You know, usually our answer is, well, God showed it to him. Now, God did reveal many things to him, but he had, where did he flee to when he fled the Pharaoh after he killed the Egyptian? I want you to talk to me to make sure you stay awake. Midian. You know where Midian is today? Saudi Arabia. Why do we say that the Sinai is in the Sinai? Well, it's because Emperor Constantine in 325, speaking of fake news, they decided that they needed a shrine, and somebody said St. Catherine's Monastery would be a good place. But all the Arabs and all the locals know it isn't Sinai, neither did the Jews, because when the peace deal was struck with Sadat, remember Sadat? Some of you older ones, you younger ones, I'll get the dinosaurs in a minute. You just hang in there. Sadat and Begin, he gave away the Sinai. Now, if that's really Mount Sinai, the holy mountain, do you think he'd have given it away? No. But you see, people, they're not aware of that. And so they just go, Jesus says, by vain you worship me, keeping traditions, doctrines and traditions of men. And they're traditional sites. The Bible is an amazing, amazing series of writings like this. Scrolls. The books of the Bible were put together much later, but in Jesus' day, you went to church and they called it the Ark. The Ark of the Covenant is a different thing, but the Ark, and you would go, and when Jesus went to Nazareth, what did he read in Nazareth? Isaiah. So he said, could I have the scroll of Isaiah from the shelf? Therefore, the Bible was chronological. This is not chronological. Therefore, a good investment for you to make is to get something like the narrated Bible that the Harvest Publishers put out, where the chronology of the Bible is there. I know you can't find anything now because it's in chronological form, but if you want a continuous chronology, you will have it the way the ancients had it. In Job, chapter 40 and 41, Job, who lived right after the flood, a book also that Moses edited it. And when I say the word edited, that means somebody had passed it down. Oral tradition and written tradition was passed down. Where did he go in Midian? Who happened to be the high priest in Midian? What was his name? Jethro. And what was Jethro's ethnic background? See, that's where I usually get a silence, and that's why I taught all those years teaching kids and finally figured I lost enough hair teaching. Kids are amazing, but I love the kids. But Jethro, he was an Ishmaelite. The biggest mistake we make, and this is a little side thing, is that Isaac didn't inherit everything. He was the executor of the will, but Ishmael was also promised he would be a great nation, and the 12 tribes would come from him. And it's like a reading at a funeral. After a funeral, Jacob was the one who was the executor. But later then the Jews cut Ishmael out, and that's why you have the problem. They're all sons of Abraham. And they go into, well, he shouldn't have. Well, he did. And he did lack faith. But God, being a God of love, has not cut the Ishmaelites today out. Therefore, when I do evangelism, I give the whole story, including what the Quran says about Jesus, and you'd be amazed. You'll have to come to my museum or hang out with me in the series. I'm starting a new series next Saturday, just on Saturday night, my buried blueprints for 3 Saturday nights in Sylmar. And so since it doesn't conflict with anything here, if you want to drive to Sylmar, you can do so. But I read from the Quran what it says about Mary and what it says about the Word of God. And it says that Mary was blessed by God and her son would be a wonderful blessing to the world. But the mullahs are teaching fake news. They don't let them read. So when I show the Muslims what the Quran really says, do you know why we have the conflict in the Middle East today? It's because when the Catholic Church or the Holy Roman Empire, whatever you want to call it, erected images in the church, then Muhammad said, why the images? Because they believe in the 10 Commandments. It's the way we do. And he says, what do you know? You're just a backward dirt guy. And they insulted them. And so they went to convert Christianity. And this is why finally the Eastern Orthodox split off and got rid of images, because of the power of Islam using the Old Testament. See, you got to think of the world differently. You can't listen to the media, and you can't listen to all what is being talked about today, because most people have very little understanding. When you are into archaeology, you're into understanding, and this is an Ark Log. And apparently it was handed down, and Jethro had an Ark Log. The next time you go to Genesis, read it. It said on the 150th day this happened, the 261st day this happened. And it's a log. And the cool thing about the chronological Harvest House publisher of the narrated Bible, that's what it's called, is they put the Ark Log in an Ark Log form. And you can really see there, where was it handed down from? Well, it was taken from the ark and handed down and handed down. And God, in his infinite wisdom, knowing that the Israelites were going to go into captivity and to lose all this, he runs to Midian, and that's where he begins Genesis. What do you think he was doing for 40 years? Just hanging out with the sheep? He was writing the history under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, to be sure, piecing together word of mouth, which every family had a historian, and they had their genealogy. That's why we have such perfect genealogies, going all the way down to Jesus. Okay, the kids are ready for dinosaurs. Chapter 40 and 41, God comes to Job because he requested, oh, that I could have a hearing. And his 4 friends that had come and badgered him, by the way, that's not good bedside manner. And he kept insisting in grace. I have done nothing wrong. I sacrificed the lamb. I have done nothing wrong. And his friends were saying, you must have done something awful for God to do this to you. And what you were alluding to, the character of God was being challenged. God does not bring calamity. Who brings calamity? Satan. Never let it be said otherwise, because it says clearly God told Satan, go do your thing. And Satan brought all of those calamities. But the way he answers in Job 38 through 41, and it's great with the topics you've been studying about fake news. Where were you when I created the world? He starts. And God is asking the 21st century that. You're so sure things happen the way they happen. In Job 40, you have a perfect description. I'm going to get him now. Of this guy. Now I know the translators. By the way, translators' comments are not inspired, even though they're in the Bible. You know, I'd say, well, I read it in the Bible. No, you didn't. That was the translator's version. This guy is Behemoth. Perfect description. Tail sways like a cedar. No one can subdue him. They say, well, that's an elephant. Well, an elephant would have a tail like spaghetti. This is not an elephant. And God says, I made him, and I'm in control of my environment. By the way, this is a herbivore. And when studying archaeology and anthropology and paleontology, all of them were herbivores before the fall. But they say the reason why this guy is a herbivore, and this guy's meat eater, is the size of the teeth. And I'll just put him up there where you can see him. There he is. There's Leviathan chapter 41. And if you read, he breathed fire. Behind every legend, there is a kernel of truth. Repeat that with me. Behind every legend, there's a kernel of truth. And some of the young people test me on that, and they said, okay, I'm going to throw out a legend here. Werewolf. And I say Nebuchadnezzar for 7 years. Everything goes back to the Bible. Walt Disney owns the Bible, although it's not copyrighted. Millions of dollars. Cinderella is the story of the Shulamite here. Solomon Shulamite. The poor girl. And the king goes out to try to find someone who's not going to marry him for his money, but true love. Many of those stories of Solomon went down through the Black Forest and ended up getting mixed up with gypsies who mixed the occult with it. But I have been chasing legends for years. And this guy breathes fire. But he was a vegetarian. Now, if you say, he's a meat eater, that's what they'll tell you, these big scientists with big things behind their name. And he is a plant eater. Why? The teeth size. I said, look at my teeth. Then I'm a vegetarian, right? And most Adventists are we were supposed to be. You cannot tell meat eaters from vegetarians just by the size of their teeth. Speaking of which, I didn't bring a tube, but I brought a claw. This is a T-Rex claw. One claw. Why don't you go away? I'm not going to hit you with one. Guys, you didn't scare now, and I can tell. That. Want to feel it? Okay, I'm on the air, right? Now, is this on still? Okay. Pass it on. Job 40 and 41. So I went in search. And one day I'm dirt biking in Montana, having a great time. This was many years ago, before the MS really hit me hard. And I was with Dave Trexler, and I was pastoring the Shoto Shelby district in Montana. And Shoto was one of my churches, and it's right at the foot of the Rockies, and it's a beautiful place to go out. And suddenly, something kicked out of the dirt. And it's part of what they're holding right now. It's a replica because I don't want anybody stealing the original. There is a company downtown that are the bone cloners that work for museums. By the way, no museum has originals because there are hundreds of museums around the world. They're kept in a vault in Washington, D.C., Smithsonian's down below. And so if these skulls, which I'm going to get to next, there is, and I informed the University of Montana, and eventually, now don't fight over it, please. You can give it back to me now. I'll let you see some other stuff. But it says in Job 41, no one can subdue this creature. He's in control of his environment. And he says, just like I'm in control of the universe. And he uses this creature. And did Job say, I don't know what creature you're talking about. You talked about mountain lions, and you talked about goats and ostriches and all of these animals. It's almost like zoology going through 38 through 41. And then suddenly these two creatures, and he said, so we know these two went onto the ark. That's how we know it, using the Word of God. And then archaeology has discovered that some bones, many, many different bones of dinosaurs were all found together as one, showing that they were all buried at the same time and fossilized. If they just died on the ground and there wasn't a universal flood, scavengers would have carried off all their bones. That's the way they always do it. There's always some scavenger to come along. So what I began doing is connecting Bible to history. And of course, if you come to the museum, I did not bring it. Those are the original. I've left them under the glass case. The good mother lizard is my claim to fame. And guess what? When we unearthed her nest, by the way, kids, do you know how big the mother lizard, she stood 14 feet tall. Do you know how big her nest was? Now, dinosaurs lay eggs. Big eggs. Would make a wonderful omelet. Anyway, I don't know, though. Can you eat a dinosaur egg versus a chicken? Never mind. Anyway, the nest was as big as this whole center part. And guess what? The Bible of evolutionary science, their Bible is the geological column. The lowest is the oldest, then comes the next one, then comes the next one, then comes the next one. There are 3 geological timelines through one nest. What does that prove? It disproves it. And they say, well, that was an anomaly, Pastor Aitken. See, that's always their answer. I said, can't you at least acknowledge that I sit and listen to you guys, and I do, long length, at their theories. And I take notes. And I try to deal with respect. I really think your story of the university this morning, if I'd have been head of the university, no matter what I believed, I'd have fired that person. Because they're there to learn. And clearly they were there to just say, this is the way it is, and that's the end of it. By the way, we don't have to do that either. What we do, what we should be doing, is introducing our young people to all sides while keeping them anchored to this book. But usually we go to the left or to the right. You know, it seems like we never can hit the middle of the road. I don't know why. What is amazing is I've had quotes, all kinds of quotes, from Ellen White about the page, I think it's 270 in evangelism. It says, people who cannot sit and listen to other people's opinions are not fit to teach. Without arguing. Now, he did it respectfully. Asked a question. And that's what you have to do. I sat in one class in Washington, taking many of these courses that prepared me for this, because I had to go to the world to get these courses. And I'm the only creationist in 310 students. And finally one day, and luckily Dr. Kennedy, she was female, great evolutionary scientist, written all kinds of books. She brought up photosynthesis. That's a big word to most of you. But it is the chain. In photosynthesis, you need animals to produce carbon. And the plants breathe it in and produce oxygen. And that chain continues. And I said, you said there were millions of years where there was just plants. And they were not out of the sea yet. They were protoplasm. How did the plants breathe? And it stumped her. But unlike this professor you talked about, she said, I'll get back to you. And she did. And she said, this has stumped me. Maybe there were carbon-breathing plants. I don't know. I've got to talk to people. But at least I created a little faith to know why I'm a creationist. You need plants, animals created within days of each other to keep the chain, the perfect chain, going. All right. More stuff. Where do we go next? See Neanderthal man there? This is supposed to be our ancestor. That's your uncle. I'm kidding. That's supposed to be your ancestor. So, this one was the most complete Neanderthal man they found, and they found DNA on the original skull. And they got all excited. They shouldn't have been, because they got a big surprise when they found. By the way, look at these teeth. Why don't you have teeth like this? Why don't you have a brain this size? Why did we devolve? If we evolved, why did we devolve? And then they got the DNA test back, and they discovered, and it was in the LA Times in 2010, and I have it in my program Saturday night, actually up on the screen. The human DNA was mixed with simian DNA. What's simian? And they've never been able to cross-clone apes and man. And guess what Ellen White said? This person supposedly with a third-grade education. I don't know why we keep saying that, because she's self-educated. She was smart. She read everything she could get her hands on. She said the reason for the flood was the amalgamation of man and beast, which defaced the image of God. And so I paid the ultimate price from the bone cloners, because I said, I'm a museum, you know. They gave me a little discount. What is nice about it, Harriet said, what did you pay $3,200 for? A skull. And he says, oh boy. Oh boy. And I said, God will get it back. And it did. In time, people donated right back in and gave it to me back. There it is. Because I wanted it on display. This isn't just proof of the Bible. It's proof of the spirit of prophecy. That she knew stuff. And the Bible talks about that too. So that brought me back to the Bible and looked for it. And I found passages like this. In Genesis 11, verse 5, God comes down to the Tower of Babel. By the way, I was working with Jews in New York when I pastored on 11th Street in New York before I went to the conference office and was the ministerial man for that. By the way, they asked, why didn't you go up like your dad from there? Because I like the trenches. I like being in the trenches, and sometimes the brethren, well, I won't go into it, but sitting behind a desk just isn't my thing. I got to be out looking. I got to be out seeking. Anyway, it's an amazing thing to me that my discoveries, I started finding all kinds of things in the Bible, and I was teaching, as I said, Jews would come to the 11th Street Church, which is a big cathedral, and Rockefeller sold it to the Adventists in 1940 for $600,000 because they were building a new church. He was a Southern Baptist. Guess what that church is worth now? Sitting right near, right at Greenwich Village. Oh, my goodness. Glad those people at those conferences weren't into selling everything like we've been late. I can say it because now I'm retired. They kept the church, and it's still going strong, but they would come in, and I would say, the first thing they said, I don't believe in the Trinity. Then I said, who is God talking to? Is he senile? Come, let us make man in our image. And that convinced him. He became an Adventist. And the guy came over, the rabbi, and he said, I want to know what got Marvin to come to your church. He said he was the strongest. He said he believes in the Word of God, the Old Testament. And I only used the Old Testament. That's all I used. Anyway, let us make man in our own image. Well, in 11, verse 5. See, I've got so much to say and not too much time to say it. So I'll be a little scatterbrained at times. But I said, God said at the Tower of Babel, this they begin to do, and now nothing will be impossible for them. Their science was way advanced. I know evolutionary scientists have all these ancients walking around in loincloths, the men dragging the women and going, hoo, hoo, hoo. Whereas Genesis, these civilizations were superior to ours. If you come Saturday night, you'll see runways that I've photographed. Where are the airplanes? Why would there be runways, and why is there a battery that we found in archaeology unearthing a tomb in Peru that had a metal device on the inside? They discovered it was an ancient battery. What did the ancients need a battery for? And it begins to change the whole tone that man was once brilliant and fell. And God did it by scattering, changing the language. But guess what? As it was in the days of Noah, what does it say? So will it be. Finally, the language barrier's been crossed. My Apple, I can write anything, hit a button, and it'll be in Chinese. Language is no longer a barrier on this earth. And we've come together again, and we're doing stuff. Scientists won't come right out and say, I know we had Dolly the sheep and cloning and all kinds of things. But this guy, I believe, proves human DNA. Also, the same man came out and said, if that's true, then they were sterile and they could not reproduce. And how could this man not reproduce and we come from him? But they said, oh, it came from Peking man or Java man. By the way, that's not a coffee. Java man, carrying a little Java. I got all these skulls in my museum in the cabinet of the curiosities. Do you realize in the 1880s, Christians had all these archaeological cabinets? I said it started in 1844, and they were proving the Bible and all of that. And you could pay 10, 15 cents in New York and go see the cabinet of the curiosities. And they would show you femurs that were big, twice as big. Real. The man was twice as big. You say, well, where is all that stuff today? I traced it to the New York Museum of Natural History. And when I was pastoring in New York and then later worked in the conference, I became a member and actually did a couple lectures down there for them because they liked that I pulled crowds, and so they're just worried about this aspect of it. And I said, I understand that the New York Museum, about 1900, went and bought up all the cabinets of the curiosities in New York so there would not be any competition, and they brought them to the museum, and then everybody could go to the New York Natural History Museum. I said, where are they? They say they're in the sub-basement. And I said, may I see them? They said, sure. By the way, that's a weird place down there. Because there's a lot of weird stuff down there. There's two-headed snakes and all kinds. But you remember in the ancient day, you may have even remembered some of the older ones. They used to have carnivals where they'd have this unusual stuff. They don't permit it anymore. You know, the half man, half woman. I'm not going to even comment on that, what's happening today. But they had all of these crazy stuff. And I got to look at it and I said, can I have some of this stuff? And they said, you can photograph it and it's in my program. But they wouldn't let me take it. And I said, you're never going to display it. No, because it doesn't fit our template. Anything that does not fit the evolutionary template is removed from the museum. I said, are you doing a disservice? Am I doing that? The human-looking skull over there, the one that's got black and white on it, that's Piltdown Man. They actually took a gorilla's jaw and a human top and passed it off as the missing link until somebody discovered it in 1956. And they admitted it was a fraud. What else is a fraud? And that's why you young people, be very careful. Christian education is so important. You get your basis in the Word, and then you can go out and you have a clear way of thinking and you have a clear way of judging what is right and what is wrong. Well, I've got the cabinet of the curiosities in Silmar, man. All kinds of things like that. Okay, where do we go next? Some of you wondered what this skull was. Hello? There we go. Here is Piltdown Man. Who's this guy? Well, a Hollywood producer that I know came to my program, was fascinated, said, let me make you what we might have looked like if God hadn't sent the flood and stopped the cloning and the crossbreeding. And he made this for me. Wouldn't you like to look like that? The kids all say yes, of course. Or do you actually give it to them? Here is something interesting. Here's a rock. Again, it's replica. Here's a rock. Just keep this one alive and I'll sit down, then when I get up I'll move. This rock is 100 million years old. So I'll play in their ballpark. Why is there a writing tool embedded in a 100 million year old rock? According to evolution, when did man rise? You see, we don't know a lot of this stuff. We're not teaching our kids this stuff. I'll give you a little commercial. If any of you here at the school or wherever, and I say this to all the schools, I will go into the schools, bring some of my artifacts, and we'll talk to the kids. Some of the little older kids, the younger ones like it too, I suppose. But they say man came on the scene only less than 600,000 to 1 million years ago. Why is this embedded in millions and millions of years of rock? I said, you've been dating, so this has to be 100 million. If this is 100 million, and man was on the earth 100 million years ago? Oh, no, no, no. And so I said, here's the evidence. This is one that we get oohs and ahs from kids. Doesn't it look nice? Remember the movie Jurassic Park? Well, some of you don't because you may not. But you really ought to get the video. They used amber to clone dinosaurs. And there is a bug twice the size of our bug today. This is from the flood. Look at how smooth the back, it's sort of, it got torn out from where it was. But you know that's like sapling from tree. And look at the bug size. Did you kids see it? Now, don't drop it. But you can show it to the other kids over there. Look at the size of that bug. Everything before the flood was twice as big. Man was twice as big. And people used to laugh at that idea that Adam and Eve stood over 12, 13, 14 feet tall. But everything from the antediluvian world is old. The genealogies, you've got 600, 700, Methuselah. How old is Methuselah? Then right after the flood, suddenly it drops. Why? Because the flood took out the ozone and the layer around the earth. That's another thing you'll see Saturday night. And I've done it in Hollywood style because I'm telling you that the general public, they eat this stuff up. And I sprinkle the doctrines into my archaeology. In the old days, the doctrinal approach worked. It's not working anymore. You ask somebody, are the dead really dead? They say, I hope not. Or I hope so. You'd say, will Russia rule the world? He said, sounds like it. And you get all these topics. And I am not topical. I tell the story of the Bible in my evangelism. People like stories. You may not be aware of this, but George Lucas. That ring a bell with anybody? You can't walk into a store now and not see his influence. Star Wars. Star Wars candy. Star Wars this. Star Wars that. George Lucas married a Seventh-day Adventist girl. And for years, until his divorce, I never asked him what the divorce was all about, because I don't get into that. He had an Adventist in the family, and the whole Star Wars concept is like a ripoff of the Great Controversy. Battles between good and evil. A evil emperor starting and falling, and then Luke Skywalker and all of this. And there's a lot of things that lead people back today to look at the Word in a fresh new way, and we're not taking advantage of it. But I am. I want you to know. If you're going to talk to the most postmodern generation, you have to speak their language. And though I'm older than the hills, I'm still a kid at heart. Aren't you a kid at heart still? I think all of us ought to be kids at heart. And my museum has figures. Now, if you look here, you kids here, you will see all kinds of creatures here from before the flood, some that made it. By the way, why didn't they asked me, how did a big dinosaur like that get into the ark? Well, they went on as young. Behemoth's only about this tall when he's young. The fallacy of Jurassic Park and Jurassic World and all of these Jurassic movies is that Hammond could grow a dinosaur in 3 or 4 years that's that big. That's a 120-year-old creature. Reptiles keep growing until they die. I've been in South America. I've trudged the jungles looking for things, and I've run into anacondas. And some of them, the natives told me, that's 80, 90 years old, and he's big, this big around. And they just keep growing until an accident or they die or something happens. So, probably T-Rex here, it's the size of a chihuahua that went onto the ark. And this is a little bigger. And wouldn't God ask 2 by 2 and 7 by 7 the animals that went in to be young? Would you want old codgers that are played out to go onto the ark? No. If you want them to reproduce, you get young. And immediately they say, I never thought of that. See, many of the scientists that I'm working with now, I will now tell you that I believe that 85% I know that's a figure I've made, but it's a figure based on the people I've talked to. 85% of scientists believe in God. But they don't dare say that they argue with facts because they'll lose their funding. And that's what happens when they lose their funding, it's over. That's what they told me up in Ridgecrest. I don't dare say what I believe here. And I said, this is America, isn't it? Well, you found that now in other areas that people don't dare say politically for fear somebody may call them a racist or something else. And you can see the prophecies heading to the end. Can you imagine when they finally turn their sights on us, what the fake news will do to us? Are you ready to stand in that time and not waver? Something to think about. Anyway, oh, I got so many things here. I got a shark. See there? Guess where I found him? A normal place for a shark, 13,000 feet up the side of a mountain. Just a normal place where sharks fly. There's one movie that has them flying. I noticed. Fanciful stuff. They were embedded in the ark. In the flood. Harriet should be here. She said she was coming to be a fact checker to make sure I get my facts right. And I said, are you sure it's not a fact checker? And I said, you can do that later. But you need to check my facts. Anyway, but I'm correcting myself as we go. There is little Homo habilis. Now, this guy, according to the geo column, is millions of years older than Neanderthal. And yet, there doesn't seem to be much change. Now there are people who are in the science field who are beginning to believe in a different kind of evolution. They call it spurt evolution. That things went along and then spurted up and then went back down and then spurted up. That type of thing. Because they are so confused about the facts. Now, if you're going to be a good scientist today, and I believe in good science, what you should do is take all the facts to be an inductive reasoning person. What is inductive reasoning? You do not have a premise. You seek to find truth. And then you come to a conclusion. What science is doing is deductive reasoning while saying evolution is right, and now I'll show you all of the evidence. By the way, you can find evidence for about anything you want to find doing the deductive method. Sphinx. Told you about the Sphinx. I told you about Queen Nefertiti, and I wanted to save the best till last. I'm holding it in my hand. Now, first, you have to be able to read hieroglyphics. And I used to go to Egypt, and I said, man, I would love to know what each of these tombs, what they're saying. But you have to, now I have a little book like Indiana Jones in the film had, you know. I can cheat. I can go and see what it really is in case I forget. Akhenaten, 80 years after the Exodus, fired all the gods and turned to the one and only God, Aten. And he was ridiculed and eventually overthrown. His son was Tutankhamun. Do you know what that means? Any of you know what Tutankhamun means? It means in the image of the Creator God. His name bears the sign that his father taught him, stepfather. Now, here's what Akhenaten, from reading off the hieroglyphics, this is where archaeology becomes really important. Here is what Akhenaten and King Tut believed. There was only one God to be worshipped, and I found a psalm of his, O thou only God, there is no other God but thou. Wouldn't it be interesting if we found Akhenaten in heaven? Didn't Ellen White say there'll be many, many there we don't think will be there, and then there'll be some we think are going to make it and aren't there? Graven images were banned, number 2. True God, said the king, has no form, and he held to this opinion and died for that opinion, because Egypt, of course, had a little different way of looking at it. No personal representation of Aten, which is the god, are found in the Amarna period. But let me show you, this is Akhenaten. This is his queen, and this is little Tut. Notice the round disc. Everybody assumes that's the sun god. It's not. He said it's not sun. Amun-Ra, he did not worship Amun-Ra. He worshiped Aten. Notice the rays are coming down, and their little hands. I hope you come up here afterwards and ask me questions and look at the specifics. This is a personal God. He was the first one to invite people into the temple, and that's why his temple in Amarna, which is just ruins today, is massive. The cult of death, number 3, and the idea of immortality of the soul was completely abandoned. How's that? It came back with Ramesses. Ramesses, I call him the graffiti artist of Egypt, and he went through the 18th dynasty, and by the way, that's where the Exodus, you'll have to come to my seat. I can't present everything here. But Moshe, I asked many of the locals, Moshe, Thut Moshe, that means Moses, that's a princely name. And Thutmose III died 40 years before Jericho fell, according to pottery. So in archaeology, you have markers. You have over 12 or 13 markers that point to Thutmose III as the Exodus Pharaoh. He had one son, and both died. We know how the son died. It's not listed on the grave, but he died. And Amenhotep took over. And the house of Thutmose fell until years later when Thutmose IV tried to make a comeback, but he was an absolute idiot, a product of marriage between brother and sister, and they finally assassinated him. Ritual animals were not sacrificed. The Holocaust, with one exception. Guess what animal could be sacrificed? And it's on the tomb in Amarna. A lamb. That's the only one you can sacrifice. The universality of worship. Akhenaten opened up religion worship of the supreme deity to all peoples, Egyptian or non-Egyptian. Often priests and pharaohs in acts of worship in the temple welcomed people in and said, Aten is a loving God. Egypt didn't like that because they've got some real bad boys in Egypt. Horus, Seth. By the way, Seth is the god of the underworld, which later the Greeks patterned and then the Christian church adopted as Satan and Hades. Seth. And that's why in Star Wars, guess what the emperor was? He's a Sith. They changed one letter. The Sith. That's the one Luke Skywalker threw down the shaft and destroyed him in the end. Evil is destroyed. Anyway, Burial without worldly goods. Well, there was a few. Luckily, we had her Ark of the Covenant, but it was pretty sparse. Magic and myth were thrown out. Akhenaten flung out Osiris and all of his entourage. Fired them. And finally, monogamy. He stayed true to his queen, and though she did not produce him a male heir, he adopted the male heir. And here's the biggest thing. I found this big relief in Egypt, and I stared at it, and I had my guide with me, and he said, I said, what is that? He said, they're circumcising. And I said, Egyptians don't circumcise. He said, during the Amarna period, circumcision came in. Another marker. How does archaeology then prove the Bible? It's a sprinkling. You find out the Exodus Pharaoh. By the way, I looked at the mummy. I said, I got to see Thutmose III. I got to stare into his eyes. So they took me up to the Hall of Mummy. They usually don't open it. But I said, I'm from the General Conference. And they said, well, if the general sent you, go right ahead. I did have a little General Conference card at that time because I was doing evangelism for it. And my dad taught me, just say the General Conference sent you, and they'll think some general somewhere. And so I went in and took a picture of him, and I have it. That's next Saturday night when we do Egypt. We do creation and the flood this Saturday night. I took a picture of him. He was laying there, half smiling. And you know what I think he was saying at that moment? He went down into the Red Sea. I don't care. Some of you base your religion on the Ten Commandments movie. There is no way Yul Brenner can go back and face Egypt when you have just lost. You know what they did back then? They took their own lives. And the Pharaoh knew it's now or nothing. And the Bible says his chariots were cast into the sea. Pharaoh and his chariots are gone. So I looked, and I asked one of the curators there, why are all the other hands bony, but it looks like Thutmose III is wearing gloves? And he said, he bloated. He must have been in water a while. And they couldn't get rid of the bloating effect. In fact, there's a little bloating on the face and other parts. And I went, thank you, Jesus. And I was thinking, I looked up and said, Moses, how'd you like to be laying there? Because if you hadn't chosen to be with the children of God, you'd be laying right there. And Moses says, if you were dead 3,500 years, you'd look bad too. A little bit of oil of Olay would be good. But Moses is in the kingdom of heaven. And he's listening to me right now, so I have to be very careful. No, but I think we need to search the Word. I've got one final thing. Would one of you young people help me? Would you help me go get that painting that's on the floor? It's not a painting. Pick it up and bring it to me. Thank you. When I found this, I got goosebumps. But I get goosebumps easily. Is it upside down? No. Good. I went into one of the reliefs, and guess, they told me there was a relief on the side that had also been produced onto, what's this called? Papyrus. Guess what you're looking at? Egyptians didn't wear beards. Egyptians did not wear colorful clothing like this. This is Joseph and his family coming into Egypt. And it's honored in Akhenaten's tomb. And so the man, to be nice to me, said, I would love to bring that stone back. He said, I won't let you chisel that stone off here. This is not done. But he said, I know a guy that has done a relief. And he gave me this for my museum. Reproduction. There he is. Look at it. Look at it, kids. Do you see the coat of many colors there? And other colorful clothing of the Hebrews. My friends, that clothes, I want to say, no, archaeology doesn't totally prove the Bible, but to me, it's a wonderful addition, because since I am sort of a deductive scientist, so I did say, Lord, show me what proves the Bible to be true. And he has done that. And I realize, but if a person goes from ground zero with no beliefs, will have to come to the same conclusion. If they know the Bible. Most people don't even know it's in the Bible. I have a quiz always. I taught at Glendale Academy for nearly 18 years. And I'd give them a quiz at the beginning, and I'd give them different names, tell me who they are. And you know how many people when I put Moses down, said he played for the Lakers. We don't know our history. Have any of you remember jaywalking? Jay on the Tonight Show, that would go ask university people around Christmas and Easter Bible questions. They didn't get any of them right. They didn't know any answers. In fact, they go down there and ask, and I guess Waters from Waters World does that as well. And he asked them, who is this? And they didn't know who the vice president was. They didn't know a lot of that. And those are the people who are graduating to go into this world. I pray to you, plead with you, that you teach your children well. The poorest and the humblest were not afraid to approach him. It says here in Testimony, Volume 3, 422. Even little children were attracted to him. They loved to climb upon his lap and kiss the pensive face with love. You're treating your kids at this church that way? I am so glad you said what you did about the little kid up there running around. Someone said, get that kid off the... They're the future. That little girl's the future of the church. And she says, I want to be up here. I don't know why I want to be up here, but I want to be up here. The children were foremost in rejoicing. Jesus had healed their melodies. He had clasped them in his arms, received their kisses and grateful affections. And some of them had fallen asleep upon his breast as he was teaching the people. Now you have a different picture of Jesus. That's why Peter said, get these kids out of here. And he said, if one of you offends one of these little ones, and I think people that are pedophiles and offender of children ought to have been listening. They always say, oh, Jesus is love. He doesn't do anything but love. Yeah, it would be better for a millstone to be hung around his neck and cast into the Sea of Galilee if you offend one of these little ones. Our job is to become children. God has given us this book as an outline tool, but let me tell you that the proper use of archaeology, and again I say there are Adventist archaeologists who have claimed things that have hurt what I'm trying to do. And scientists turn away from that. That is the most outrageous, and it is. You don't do that. You go by evidence. And then you let people make up their own mind. Don't badger them. And I've had people leave my series and says, I have things to think about. And 40 years later, I'm at Van Nuys Church, and this guy with a big old beard, it's all gray, he comes up and said, do you remember me? Yeah, right. After doing thousands of evangelism from the East Coast all the way to the West. because I've been doing this for years. I used to use slides, now I use electronic gadgetry. It's so much fun. And he said, don't you remember me? I was there, Atlantic City, when you ran your series, and I gave my heart to Jesus. And then I looked at the internet and found out you're on the West Coast, decided to come visit you. And here's the problem. I don't remember people, but this puss, everyone remembers. But it has gotten, my beard used to be black, now it's gray. But I will go to my grave believing that Jesus has placed treasures in the ground. And that's why he said in his most famous parable of all, let me close with that. Let me see if I can find it first. Here we are. I need 3 hands. I needed 3 arms for years. Here it is. And you can write this down if you'd like. Is Psalm 78 verse 2, but Jesus used it in Mark 4:33 and 34. With many similar parables, Jesus spoke to them as they could understand. He did not say anything without using parables. This is where stories like Star Wars can be useful. I really believe my son first captured, he was much younger when the first one came out, and I said, do you know what Ellen White said? That Enoch is on the planet with 7 moons. And it got him to start reading her work. And today he appreciates it. But when he was alone, he spoke to them through the prophets. And he said, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. I'm just trying to dig out some of these hidden things. And when you find a treasure, what are you going to do? I've often wondered, Jesus' story of the buried treasure, it's very interesting. Would it have been ethical to tell the owner of the field you're plowing, you have a treasure in your field? No. Instead, he kept silent and said, I want to buy it. And he took all the money he had and bought it, and then went in rejoicing. And this is why I do what I do. Keep on studying. You know that even though the secular world has so many things, there are programs that talk about the Exodus. The National Geographics, others that run programming. That we should be running those kinds of programming. The world is running it for us. And so I thank you for your patience this afternoon. Thank you, kids, for coming. And remember, I got something for you over there. First, I'll talk to the adults here. But keep on keeping on. Trust the Word. It's worth trusting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor John. I want to give you an opportunity to perhaps ask him some questions. I'm sure that his presentation has caused you to think about some things, and so let's go ahead and have you ask some questions. And
any questions? Yes.
Excuse me. My question is, you mentioned.
Turn it up, because I'm a little hard of hearing too, among other things.
Can you hear me now? Oh my. Even I can hear myself. I was going to ask you about the program you were mentioned next Saturday night, and where would that be?
Sylmar Church. It's on Glen Oaks, 13456 Glen Oaks, Sylmar. I've been running it in the western part, and like I said, around. And finally, the church said, we'll break your legs if we don't run it in our church. So I put them on the schedule. And I'll be running it there. And the nice thing about being at Silmar is then afterwards you go into the full museum, which is a very big room, full of all the artifacts I've collected over the last 47 years. Shouldn't even say that. So many years I've been doing this. Any other questions? Shout out.
Okay, I've always wondered if Park La Brea, you know, where the tar pits are.
Yes.
Is that pre-flood, after the flood?
Post-flood.
Post-flood.
And by the way, La Brea gives you a snapshot of the animals after they left the ark, and the ice age followed the flood, making the oceans lower. And the animals, they said, how did they get over to the New World? Just like they went into the ark, God sent them in all directions. And one of the areas they came down through here and they fell into the pits. And you can see saber-tooths. You can see camels from the old world. They're no longer here. Other animals there. It's great. I do tours sometimes where I go to the Natural History Museum and also La Brea. And it's a lot of fun. That is very good. Yes.
One other question. Have they ever found human remains in the tar pit?
Yes, they did. They found a woman. Just one woman.
One woman.
One woman. She must have stumbled because she had to be smart enough to know that was a tar pit. But there was water over the top of it for the animals. They would come to drink.
Right.
And like the tar baby, they got their feet caught in the front. And then the more they wiggled, the more they went down. And then, of course, they were stationary. So on top of the sloth, here comes a saber-tooth, pounces on the sloth. Lunch right in front of me, and then it goes down. And so they're both together. We've got their bones. One killed the other, and then they both went down into the pit. They found hundreds and hundreds of bones in the tar pit, way in the back.
Hi. You said the one dinosaur would eat meat, and one was a herbivore.
Well, that's what the evolutionists say.
Okay.
Yeah, after the flood, he continued to be a herbivore, most likely. But this guy got the taste of blood. And
other
in
animals?
Job, he's got the taste of blood, and he said, anybody that has an encounter with him, if you have another encounter after that, you're very lucky, because he's dangerous.
Were they also herbivores because of his long neck? The one?
Yeah, the long necks to reach some of the high leaves and some of the cycads and trees, especially in pre-flood times. Yes?
Was there more than two, or were there?
I believe there were, because guess what it says in the Bible? Everything that creeped and crawled on the earth after its kind. What's a thoroughbred versus a crossbred? Many dinosaurs went onto the ark. And they say, well, where are they today? Simple. Ice Age. Cold. And reptiles don't do well in cold, and they were hunted to extinction. And you know, there are animals today on the endangered species list. Back then, they didn't have that list. But one of the biggest culprits that I found in my studies and my research was little compies. The dinosaurs only this big. They don't get any bigger. But they love dinosaur eggs. And they would go into these guys' nests and raid. And what happens when there's no eggs? I think they're the number one reason the dinosaurs went extinct. By the way, you've heard about global warming? You can say yes, but it ain't man-made, it's God-made. Now, maybe we can slow it a little by doing some things, but we are headed for the new earth, folks. It's going to get warmer and warmer. It's been getting warmer. But when the oceans were low, there was a freeway between Asia all the way through Alaska and down into the United States. And by the way, this next, I guess it's next Saturday night, I trace the Native Americans and how they came and built pyramids just like Egypt in the Yucatan. And then the oceans rose and rose and rose and rose, and eventually got cut off, and both sides forgot about the other. Yes?
This morning you started to talk about the Sphinx and the watermarks. but
Oh,
you-
yes. The Sphinx and the Watermark. They did an extensive archaeological search of it. Take a look at it. And they've come to the conclusion that the Sphinx stood in a flood for a long time with water that moved. Water has that effect on it. And they said the Sphinx was there long before the pyramids. Isn't it interesting that if that Sphinx was the center, now what is the legend of the flood? What's it called? Atlantis. We named the Atlantic after it. Atlantis is a legend, but it's based on a truth. And one night, the world was gone. Isn't it interesting that if Ellen White is correct, that the amalgamation of man and beast was the main reason for the flood, and you've got half man, half animal as their symbol. By the way, I got news for you. The head has been altered, and the king put his head on it. It used to be probably a lion's head. It could be. Why doesn't it have a nose? Because Alexander the Great, Napoleon, excuse me, Alexander, well, he can't hear me anyway. Napoleon did target practice on the nose. He really loved antiquities, man. And that's why there's a nose. Any other questions? Yes?
TG, but I didn't hear what you said about her. And the reason I was interested, because when I was younger and took a ceramics class, I made a pendant of a side view of Nefertiti in relief.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering would like to know more about her.
Yes. About Queen Nefertiti?
Yes.
Queen Nefertiti means the beautiful one, and she was married to Akhenaten, and we found her mummy. Horribly defaced. Nefertiti means the beautiful one comes. Torn the side of her face. This is Ramses now. And ripped this open, and her arm was ripped off. And when we came to Nefertiti's tomb, there was nobody in it, but there was a body lying in the corner. And they figured they matched it to the hat and to that gold, the way she used to wear it, and the different reliefs. And lo and behold, we found Queen Nefertiti. You'll see that too. I've got all that. I can't haul all that here. It's been good to be with you. Oh, you got another question. Okay. I thought you were waving at me like this, like my wife does. My wife goes like this, and I said, "What are you doing, dear?" Yes.
I've heard it said that the pharaohs were not indigenous to that area, that they were
There were
from
some.
somewhere else, that they were kind of an invading elite party that kind of settled in and
Yes.
controlled them. Is that true?
Yes. The Scorpion King, the very first, they made a movie on it that was atrocious, but the Scorpion King, and let's see here, Namer was his son, came, of course, the scattering of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The Nubians were from Ham, the dark skin, and they ruled during the intermediate period. And during the time of Joseph, which is the time of Joseph coming into the land on this picture, they tended to have mixed races that were up near the top. Thutmose would have never chosen as assistant. In fact, he said, "I do not know Joseph," and set out to destroy the Merles. But we have Nubians, but the pharaohs are related to the Ishmaelites. Very interesting. or the sons of Ishmael. They're lighter skinned, and then you have some that are darker skinned. But guess what? God loves us all. Makes no difference what pigmentation. But Thutmose, the house of Thutmose was very racist. And only we can rule. And they made the Nubians slaves. Any other questions? Yes. You better shout. She's pointing to something.
Oh, she's just curious why half of the skull is black. Is that just filled in?
Which one? The white on black, that is Piltdown Man. That is the science's hoax until it was discovered in 1956. But guess what? The London Museum still has Piltdown Man standing in its full, and I took a picture of it. I said, didn't you guys know this was a hoax? Well, I haven't heard. That kind of thing. And so they tried to get the jaw of orangutan and the top part of human and to pass it off, and for a long time it worked. By the way, when I went to order that from the bone cloners, they said, you can get this one real cheap. Nobody wants this one. And I said, I know why. It was a hoax. So what is it? He said, well, for $12.95, we'll send you that. And I said, that's better than $3,000, whatever. I had to pay for the other one. But it shows you that nobody orders those things. Our students are not being taught the truth. They're being guided into one direction. And so in museums, I usually have a bunch of kids around me. I notice that people start coming and saying, we like your tour. And I don't know how much they appreciate it downtown. But I stand there in the front entry and I said, take a look at Leviathan. Now open your Bible and read Job 41 and see if it describes him. And it, by the way, it describes him to a T. All of my kids at Sylmar, and I don't have many. The church was neglected for many years. Now we're trying to bring it back. But the kids, they said, finally we get to play with dinosaurs because we were told the devil made them. The devil did not make dinosaurs, folks. The devil was instrumental in trying to clone all kinds of creatures. What are the cloned creatures? We do not know. But every living thing that creeped and crawled. I have in my museum on the roof, ceiling, hanging there, an 8-foot pterodon. And I say, that tempted Eve. And they went, I thought it was a snake. And I said, you're reading the English translation, flying reptile. Cursed now to go on the ground. What was the first animal to go extinct? The flying pterodon. And I get goosebumps just saying it to you. And I said, you guys have no idea the story. You have no idea of what it is. And then I said, do you want to know the story now? So that you can match it to the things you're looking at here. It's an exciting story. I got to quit. I know you want to go home. And my wife thinks I'm died on the freeway or something. I don't know. She's at Sylmar. She really is sorry that she could not be here. But my son is preaching there. And we only have one pianist. I wasn't going to say any of you are pianists. You can come join us. And then we found one other. But I'm doing what I did at the beginning of my ministry in Montana, starting another church. I had a big church. Now they say, go do it in this church. Oh, thank you. I'm retired, thank you. But, hey, Sylmar is in a difficult spot. It's Hispanic. The Spanish church there is big. It's huge. But the English-speaking church has dwindled. So pray for me at Sylmar. It's at 7 o'clock. And I'll give you guys that want a brochure, I'll give you a facsimile copy if you will come up of it. and you can support the people of Sylmar and those surrounding areas. But they're going to get a treat, because Buried Blueprints is evangelism, but it doesn't feel like evangelism. It feels like entertainment on Saturday night.
Thank you so much, Pastor. We really appreciate you coming, and thank you for each of you coming. Yes. And I'm sure, as he said, if any of you want an up-close look afterwards here now, you're welcome to come. Let's have a prayer to close. Lord, we thank you so much for these little evidence of the past that really speak the truth about who you are. We know the devil has tried to use all of this stuff to corrupt and spin his fake news narrative about you and to not give us a very good impression of you. But thank you so much that the past speaks of the truth of who you are, a God of love who cares for us. May we embrace that each and every day in our lives as we journey from here to forever with you. May that day be soon, we ask and pray in Christ's name. Amen. Thank you again so much for coming.